I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions.
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And this is the Fig Tree Podcast.
Today we get to one of the most famous prophets, Daniel. But first, why don't we check in? Jacob, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How am I doing? I don't know. I went to Disneyland on Monday. That was fun. It was for Star Wars Day. My wife and I went. So May the 4th be with you.
And also with you.
So it was fun. Yeah, great day. And then we watched Star Wars movies and made Legos.
And on the 5th, did you see the Sith?
I did not. Because you didn't come to church that day.
Oh, very nice.
Mike, how are you?
I'm good. I did not go to Star Wars Day. I am, just enjoying work and living one day at a time and enjoying the presence of Jesus in my life today.
Amen.
Very good. Well, next week, my husband and I are going to a wedding in Kauai, and I'm really excited because I haven't been there in a really, really long time. And
Sounds really fun.
Yes, I'll be looking for Jesus there too.
So the book of Daniel is, according to Robert Alter, surely the most peculiar book in the Hebrew Bible.
Yes, the book of Daniel has all these strange visions and predictions, and if you thought Ezekiel was weird and hard to interpret, Daniel is even weirder and harder to interpret.
What about the psilocybin and the mushrooms?
That would be even more applicable, I think, to this book. It's very similar in many ways to the book of Revelation, which is surely the most peculiar book in the New Testament. And even though we've been in the prophets, Daniel represents something of a completely new genre, apocalyptic literature.
In fact, in the Jewish ordering of the scriptures, it isn't even included with the prophets. Instead, it is grouped with the writings, the group that includes the wisdom books, the Psalms, and some of the historical books.
So you said apocalypse. Does that mean the end of the world?
Yeah, you would think that, wouldn't you? We tend to use the word that way in our modern day, but the word apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean end of the world. It comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, which means unveiling. And apocalypse is meant to have special insight into the past, the present, and the future. In fact, as we will see, an apocalypse has a lot more to do with interpreting the present than it does with predicting future events.
Yeah, that's right. But we're going to split Daniel into 2 episodes. So we'll actually talk more about apocalypse on the next episode.
Yeah. So the apocalyptic parts of Daniel are mostly in the second half of the book. That's right.
But we should keep in mind that the first half of the book, which has more narrative and focuses on the story of Daniel and his friends, is what informs the apocalyptic section of the book.
The first half of the book is surprisingly political, dealing with issues of power, identity, and what it means to faithfully follow God while living in a society that doesn't share your faith.
Very helpful for us, I think.
So the book of Daniel begins right after the siege of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. After the siege, as we saw in Ezekiel, there was a deportation of most of the political, cultural, and religious elite from Jerusalem to Babylon.
Yeah, Babylon wasn't interested in eliminating the leaders of Israel. Instead, they wanted those with good education and influence to serve the Babylonian Empire.
Seems pretty smart.
Yeah. Like the Roman Empire much later, the Babylonians figured out that it was a lot more effective to assimilate the elites of the nations they conquered rather than just get rid of them.
Although we're not in a formal empire like Babylon was, we do kind of have a similar dynamic in the United States. Since we're one of the most powerful nations in the world, we often attract the top talent from countries around the world. So we've got doctors and scientists and professors and leaders and CEOs from every corner of the world. And why? Because they come for the opportunity that they can find here. And we want this because we benefit from it.
Yeah, but if the best doctors and scientists and academics come here, then their own countries don't have them.
Right. This dynamic not only benefits us, but it also then helps us to secure our spot as a world leader in a lot of fields, because the best thinkers and leaders come here, though that's not always great for the countries that they come from.
So Babylon does the same thing, but the people coming there didn't have a choice.
Yeah, that's right. They took Jerusalem's best thinkers and leaders and made them a part of the king's court, giving them daily provisions of the royal rations of food and wine.
Sounds like a pretty good deal.
Well, it was, despite being taken from their home country. They get to live really well in Babylon, and this keeps them somewhat happy. And most importantly, they're serving the Babylonian Empire.
Right. But the biggest problem for people being brought to Babylon, well, it wasn't all roses, was it? The biggest problem was that it was very difficult for them to hold on to their original culture. And for Jewish exiles particularly, it was very difficult to hold on to their faith.
Being in Babylon, getting the best food, being surrounded by all this opportunity, and being subjected to so much pressure from the Babylonians to assimilate made it very tempting to just start to live and act like a Babylonian.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine like their kids probably grew up not speaking the language that they spoke, Hebrew, or later Aramaic, but they ended up speaking Persian.
Exactly. And that is the immigrant experience here, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I know several families where the grandparents are working so hard to maintain the language of their original country with their grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And it's, they are fighting all the media and all the friends and schools and everything. It's quite a tsunami of culture that their grandchildren are immersed in.
You know what's really interesting about that too is that despite this dynamic, right, which culture survived better? The Jewish culture or the Babylonian culture?
Well, which one do we still know today?
Exactly. Right. We still have people who identify as Jews throughout the world. It's a major world religion, but Zoroastrianism or the Persian pagan religion, nowhere to be found.
But in the beginning of the book of Daniel, we are introduced to 4 exiles from the tribe of Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
When they're brought to the king's court, they're given new Babylonian names.
Daniel is named Belteshazzar.
And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are named
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Everybody knows them. And throughout the book of Daniel, we see these 4 exiles' firm resolve to hold on to their identity and faith.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the book focuses on Daniel himself. And in the very first chapter, we learned about exactly how Daniel endeavors to maintain his faith and identity while living in Babylon.
Mm-hmm. Despite being offered the best food from the royal rations, Daniel resolves not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asks the palace master to allow him and the others to do this.
Now, this makes the palace master afraid because he thinks that if Daniel and the others end up being weaker and in poorer condition because of their diet, then the king will be displeased.
Mm-hmm. So Daniel makes a deal with him. He says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations, and deal with your servants according to what you observe."
And despite eating a different diet with significantly less protein, all four of them end up being better and fatter in appearance than all the men who ate the royal rations.
So this is more like an evangelical church thing, but have you ever heard of the Daniel fast?
No, I can't say I have.
So there's this like super popular thing in, I guess in certain evangelical churches anyway, where they do a Daniel fast because it's like they're interpreting this basically as being like God's ideal diet. So you do a fast where you don't have any sugar, any meat, anything but water to drink. It's really the church, a church that I was a part of, did this a few times, and it is grueling. And it's a strange thing. So Daniel fast, look it up. Maybe try it, I guess, if you want to.
And the book says that all of them are not only made physically strong, but God also gives them great knowledge and skill and literature and wisdom. And Daniel is given the ability to interpret dreams.
Kind of like Joseph?
Yes, exactly like Joseph. In fact, a lot of the dynamics that we find in the book of Daniel are extremely similar to Joseph in Egypt.
More than this, Daniel and Joseph both play a very similar role in biblical interpretation.
But Joseph wasn't on drugs.
No, he wasn't.
Well, Daniel was high on God. Come on.
Yeah. But here's a question. Okay, so we have archetypal kind of figures throughout the whole Old Testament. We have people like Moses and David, right? But most of them have a period of time in their life where they commit some kind of sin, right?
Yeah.
Moses, David. But can you think of any point in Joseph's life where he has a fall?
Well, he kind of seems like he's bragging with his coat.
That's true. That's fair. But I'm really more fishing for after his experience. Right?
Oh, after he's in Egypt?
Yeah. So he doesn't really.
No.
And Daniel is even more. This is even more the case with Daniel. So there's no point in the book of Daniel where Daniel has some great sin that he has to atone for or anything like that. He's like straight edge, very good guy the whole time.
But is he loving like Joseph and forgives his brothers and everything for leaving him out in the desert?
Out in the pit.
That's fair, right? They have a different dynamic. But the point is that they're both considered in Christian tradition anyway Christ figures. So all of these major figures are meant to represent Christ in some way, but often Joseph and Daniel get identified as being kind of the most Christ-like Christ figures because they don't have a big sin that they're dealing with, I suppose.
So Daniel has some dreams.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but
he
so
does.
does somebody else.
Yeah, so King Nebuchadnezzar has some very troubling dreams.
So he commands that all the magicians, enchanters, and sorcerers, along with the Chaldeans, come to him and interpret his dreams. In fact, he is so insistent that he says that if they cannot tell him both his dream and its interpretation, they will be torn limb from limb.
Ouch.
But none of them can do it. And the king flies into a violent rage and even commands that all the wise men of Babylon be executed.
But then Daniel saves the day.
In the middle of the night, God reveals to Daniel both King Nebuchadnezzar's dream and its meaning. So Daniel is brought before the king and tells him what he saw.
You were looking, O king, and lo, there was a great statue. This statue was huge, its brilliance extraordinary. It was standing before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of that statue was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked on, a stone was cut out, not by human hands, and it stuck to the statue. on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth.
Daniel tells the king that the statue that he saw represents 4 kingdoms.
The gold head represents King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon.
The silver represents a second, inferior kingdom, and the bronze a third, which will then rule over all the earth. Finally, there will be a 4th kingdom represented by the iron, but it will be a divided kingdom represented by the iron mixed with clay. And Daniel says, "And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall this kingdom be left to another people. It shall crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain not by hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has informed the king what shall be hereafter. The dream is certain, and its interpretation trustworthy."
Nebuchadnezzar is so impressed by this that he falls down before Daniel and tries to worship him, even commanding that a grain offering and incense be offered to him. And Daniel was made the ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all. Another Joseph allusion, I think. He's made over the wise men of Babylon. But Daniel requests that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be put over the affairs of Babylon. So he doesn't want all the power. He gives it to his friends. And then he remains in the king's court. So this is a really interesting story, frankly, the dream and its interpretation. What do you think's going on here?
He doesn't want all the responsibility. He sees it, but it's a lot of pressure and.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Super
Daniel
scary.
rejecting well, and you always know that your life's in a little bit of danger if you have that much power under the king.
Well, and he just tore all the other smart people from limb to limb.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
But what's going on with the dream part?
Yeah, Daniel is talking about this kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall this kingdom be left to another people.
Yeah.
So it's a foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Sometimes people will try to interpret this by saying, okay, here's which of each of these kingdoms this represent, and they'll say, okay, perfect. This perfectly predicts Jesus. But there's a problem that there were actually 4 kingdoms that came after Babylon, not 3. So you can try to cram them into the interpretation, but it doesn't quite work. And usually the best explanation is actually that this was written after the third of those 4 kingdoms that followed Babylon. So, this is left to people's interpretation, but I think this gets back to that whole point we made earlier about interpreting the present more than it's interpreting the future necessarily. So it's interpreting that there will be kingdoms that come and that there's all this power and brutality that springs up in the world, but that God will use that and what's leading from that is God's kingdom, which will last forever. And that's what Jesus preached.
Exactly.
So it seems like things are looking up.
Uh-huh.
Yep. But King Nebuchadnezzar seems to have let the whole golden head part of the dream go to his head.
He sets up a golden statue of himself that was 60 cubits tall. I mean, right after the whole dream sequence, and now he's doing this. But he sets up this golden statue, 60 cubits tall, that's about 98 feet tall.
That's just a bit shorter than the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio.
So it's big.
Yes, especially for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And King Nebuchadnezzar commands that all the people of the empire come and worship his statue. Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm. But unsurprisingly, most of the Jews would not worship the statue. And the Chaldeans rat out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the king, and he flies into a rage. He orders that they either worship the statue or be thrown into a fiery furnace.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up."
So the king, in a rage so intense that his face was distorted, has the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Have you ever been that angry?
Never. I've blacked out, but I've never been that angry. And he orders that the 3 be thrown into the furnace.
The fire is so hot that the men who threw them into the fire were themselves killed by the heat.
But when they look into the furnace, the king and his counselors see not only the 3 men in the furnace, but a 4th walking around unharmed.
So they call out for them, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out unharmed, their clothes the same as before, not even smelling like the fire.
So Nebuchadnezzar is impressed, and he says, Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God."
And he makes a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So he throws them in the fire and then tells them that it's okay and wants everybody to worship these people.
I feel like Nebuchadnezzar is a little two-faced. He's just like constantly going back and forth.
And
between...
a little full of
Yeah.
himself.
Well,
Yeah.
he's
I want a big old giant 98-foot head made of gold.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like, he heard the dream and he was like, well, that statue doesn't sound very nice. How about a whole gold statue? I can circumvent God's will.
Me.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he's certainly following the power, which is a pattern we see through history.
But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, despite the cost, maintain their faith in God and refuse to worship the statue. And God protects them. And there's this great miracle. And there's that 4th guy in the flames. Who do you think that is?
Jesus.
Yeah. So the text itself says an angel, but a lot of Christians have identified that person as Jesus, or at least archetypally Jesus.
It's the spirit of Jesus.
Amen.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream.
He sees this great and beautiful tree at the center of the earth with abundant fruit and foliage. And a watcher, a spiritual being, tells him to chop down the tree, but to leave its stump and roots in the ground, and to let it be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of human beings.
He asks Daniel to interpret this dream as well.
Daniel is understandably distressed about this.
I'd be distressed as well.
But he interprets the dream, and the tree is King Nebuchadnezzar.
But like the tree, he predicts that the king will be chopped down and will become like the animals. But just as the tree's roots and stump remained, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom will be reestablished.
And this will happen so that the king will learn that heaven is sovereign. And it all happens. A year later, as King Nebuchadnezzar is walking on the roof of his palace, he admires his kingdom and acclaims his own mighty power and glorious majesty. He's looking out like Simba with Mufasa, right? It's all that the light touches. Anyway, and at that very moment, he hears a voice from heaven, and he's driven out into the wilderness, living and acting like an animal.
Immediately, the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like an oxen. His body was bathed in the dew of heaven until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails became like bird claws.
Sounds kind of like something you would do if you were on the things that we talked about earlier. Well, finally, reason returns to him, and he acknowledges the sovereignty and power of God. And his kingdom is returned to him as he gives praise to God. He says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, and his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride." And
Nice. So he
lives
was
out the-
humbled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he lives out the rest of his life serving God, basically, is at least the impression Daniel gives.
He doesn't build a big statue of a tree and then live up inside of it,
No,
his face on the tree.
but that's good, and it's because he had an experience that you and I have talked about, right, Mike?
Yes. Spiritual experience, a psychic change, divine shift,
Putting yourself first, being humbled. Yeah.
Rock bottom is what I'm thinking of,
rock bottom.
right? He ends up driven out into the wilderness and living like an animal.
So you have only one choice.
Exactly.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. But I love God's patience with Nebuchadnezzar, right? He gives him so many chances, and Nebuchadnezzar squanders them each time. But then he finally gets through to him. And I feel like that's how God acts with us.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar's life is definitely the pattern of our lives. Doesn't have to be this extreme.
Yep.
Yeah.
But this happens over and over and over, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Just imagine if God was as impatient as Nebuchadnezzar was.
Exactly.
We would all have our limbs torn off.
Which is why God is God and Nebuchadnezzar is not.
I'm holding on to my arms. Okay. So then the story jumps forward to a story of a new king, Belshazzar.
The story records him as King Nebuchadnezzar's son, but other records show Belshazzar was the son of a guy named Nabonidus, and that Belshazzar was actually never king, but only a regent, someone who stands in for the actual king when he cannot rule.
His name means Bel, protect the king. Bel is another name for Marduk, the patron saint of Babylon.
Right. So, as with a lot of times in the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible, the history and the text don't always quite cohere, but it's usually done to kind of establish something in the narrative. So in this case, I think it has something to do with what Belshazzar does next. So Belshazzar has the vessels of gold and silver from the temple in Jerusalem brought out, and he throws a party. And he gets
Yeehaw.
really, really drunk.
And he has a very strange vision while he's drinking. I wonder what he was drinking.
He sees a human hand appear. I mean, this is like out of a horror movie, man. He sees a human hand appear, just the hand, apparently, and it begins to write on the wall of the palace next to the lampstand. And the text remains. So this actually happened.
What was in those chalices? Something funny.
Well, he is terrified, and he, like Nebuchadnezzar before him, seeks an interpretation from Daniel. And so Daniel tells him, just like Nebuchadnezzar before him, "You have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, even daring to drink from the sacred vessels for a party." So the writing on the wall says,
Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin.
Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians.
So Belshazzar exalts Daniel and promotes him to third in the kingdom. Just this is so funny. I mean, I feel like we don't get the humor in this, but it's like, you know, this guy, he's not even really king, he's a regent, and then he's taking the temple stuff and drinking out of it, and he has this crazy vision, and then Daniel tells him, "Hey, you're gonna have a fall," and so he exalts Daniel and promotes him to third in the kingdom, and then he's killed that very night.
Did he have nabinitis? I had nabinitis once, and they took my nabbin out.
So this is a lot like like Nebuchadnezzar.
Sorry.
It's all good. So then, in Belshazzar's place, Darius the Mede is made king of Babylon.
And Darius puts various satraps, officials who ruled over large areas, kind of like counties, in place all over the empire, with 3 presidents over the various satraps. And Daniel becomes distinguished among all of them.
Mm-hmm. So the rest of them are consumed by jealousy, and they try to find a reason to get rid of him. But they can't find any skeletons in his closet, so they conspire together, and they confront the king.
They say that they have all agreed that King Darius should set a law that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to King Darius, should be thrown in a den of lions, and he agrees.
But Daniel, despite the law, continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open toward Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously.
So the king is made aware, and he becomes very distressed because he likes Daniel. But despite his best efforts to save him, he cannot circumvent the law he signed. So he says to Daniel, "May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you." And Daniel is thrown into the den of lions.
Mm-hmm. And the next morning, the king hurries to the den, because remember, he liked Daniel, and he cries out anxiously, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you faithfully serve been able to deliver you from the lions?"
And Daniel says, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no wrong."
And the king is overjoyed and has Daniel brought up out of the den, and Daniel is unharmed. So he commands that all those who accused Daniel themselves be thrown into the den.
And he makes the decree we read at the beginning of the episode. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people shall tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions.
And so that is the first half of the book of Daniel. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about what all this means. But for now, I think we learn some really important lessons from all of this. It's living in a world that is not necessarily possessing the same values as your faith, but living your faith anyway. Martin Luther King Jr. actually really liked the book of Daniel for this reason, is that sometimes God's law, or a higher moral law, is more important than what the whims of our leaders necessarily say. And so for the Christian living today, I think it means Daniel helps us to think about how we maintain our faith, but also live in a way that promotes the prosperity and welfare of everyone in our society. Daniel was a faithful member of his society of Babylon. So I think that we learned some really important lessons. And next week, we'll get to the really weird stuff.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fig Tree Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this podcast on social media so others can join us. We hope that you have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Fig Tree Podcast.